All right, I think we're live. Hey there, Matt Petrowski. This is part two. I just ended a stream previously, and I'm just picking up where I was before. And this is ending up being a video with things I wish I knew, or things I wish someone had told me when I was new with FileMaker and developing. So, by the way, before we get into the content, if you have a question about FileMaker, take this opportunity. I'll watch this particular video. I'm really usually pretty bad with comments, but put a comment below. You, of course, can click like and subscribe if you like the content that I provide here for free on YouTube. But I also have some paid content that I have over at my other website, or my website, FileMaker Magazine, which is behind me. You can see me, or to the side, wherever it is. But let's just go to my desktop and continue with the content that we were talking about. There we go. All right, welcome to my desktop. If you watched the first video, then you know what I covered, which was basically things that I wish I had been told or had been shown as a newer FileMaker developer, just things about the environment and working within the environment. And by the way, if you're on this while I'm recording it live, feel free. I'm going to switch over here to being able to see the comments. If you have a question, go ahead and put that in. Fortunately, the FileMaker community isn't super, super large, so it's not like I have thousands of people on a live stream about FileMaker of all things, so I don't get inundated with questions, so it's easier to interact. That last video I did was 55 minutes, so it's so easy to just continuously talk about FileMaker. There is a lot in FileMaker. I must admit, if you are newer, it's pretty easy to pick up the really easy parts of FileMaker, but becoming super proficient and creating a really nice solution does take time. There's a lot of little things about how to best do this or how to best do that. That also is a topic in itself. Doing things the best way. There isn't always just one best way. There's many times multiple ways. But let's get into showing things. I like to see things on screen. I don't like to watch talking heads just talk about stuff. So let's rename this field back to what I had it before, which was name last, which also gives me, that is something I wish somebody would have told me. Field grouping is a really big thing when it comes to when you end up with a solution that grows in fields. This area off to the side, this is going to become something that's going to scroll and scroll and scroll. And being able to find the field that you want to use or that you need to connect when you're connecting a lot of fields through relationships becomes a really big issue. So coming up with a naming convention is something that's super important. Now, back in 2010, I released a website that unfortunately, I haven't updated it for a long time. It was spawned as a result of me being a Drupal developer working in PHP and noticing that PHP itself had a lot of really good core suggestions of do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. And so I decided, why doesn't this exist for FileMaker? FileMaker had created one, but it wasn't something that I really liked. Now let's talk about the differences that you'll find out there in the world in terms of naming conventions. Naming conventions become really important because your ability to find things quickly and to wire them up and make sense of a solution, even after you come in after a long time of not having worked on it, is really important. So let's go into the defined database. We talked about context and how you can quickly get in. The naming of things is, it's a very hotly contested thing across FileMaker developers. Everybody will have their own system, and this comes down to what you are most comfortable with. If you want to see my system, go to FileMakerStandards.org, and you will see that fundamentally it's the same system that I've been using for a long time. First off, up at the top, one of the biggest things is every table in your FileMaker solution is going to have, not every, but let's say 99% of the time. Even when you don't think you need it, it's probably best and easiest just to leave it in there, is a primary key. That primary key is what absolutely uniquely identifies that record and that record only. Long time in the past, this was the default serial number. If you're newer, I'm just going to suggest don't use it. Don't use it ever. If you want to be a proficient, good FileMaker developer, I don't care if you're beginning, intermediate, or advanced, there are still people out there to this day that are suggesting and putting a serial number and teaching people to use a serial number. That is absolutely, in the modern world, not the way to go. The best way to do a primary key is with a calculated value, and it is with one of two ways. There's more than these two. Get UUID is the standard that creates it creates a text value. So your result that we have down at the bottom here is going to be a text for that ID. But there is also get UUID number, which is a newer of the two. If you're just starting out with FileMaker, just go ahead with get UUID. More than likely, you're not creating a database that's going to be so massive and so processor intensive that using this actually is required. Although, I will say, as a newer user, if you want to, there is nothing wrong with using a UUID number versus a UUID. It just turns out that it's a little bit easier when you're developing to actually reference just a standard text UUID than it is a number. Because with a long sequence of numbers, you have to, I think they said people can really only remember up to 7 digits. That's why in the US, phone numbers are 7 digits long. Without the area code. So which one you pick here as a newer user, if you want to use the number because you think that somewhere down the road your database is going to be a monolithic, massive database and you need every tiny ounce of performance, go ahead, use UUID number. Doesn't matter. But whatever you're going to do, please, when you watch videos on YouTube, if they show you to use a serial number, that is purely for the sake of instruction. As a newer developer, newer or intermediate, if you already have a FileMaker database and you're using a serial number, that's not a problem. The only time that a serial number becomes a problem is when you want to use FileMaker in what's called a disconnected method. And that's when you're going to allow a person to use a copy of a FileMaker database that is not the shared database that's on FileMaker server, and they take that with an iPhone or an iPad, and they go somewhere else, and they create some records. And the problem that happens is the main database is creating numbers from 1, 2, 3, increasing to however high the current record count is. A disconnected database disconnects at a certain point. So it disconnects at record number 50, and you go put this database and you allow that to happen, you have 50, 51, 52, 53 being created in two places. That's absolutely bad. That's not unique. That's a situation where you have the same number being used to identify a record in two different places, and you never want that in a relationship. Never, ever want that. So your insurance against that is that you use a UUID. And that's just something you need to know as a beginning developer, because you're still going to see out there on YouTube and other places people using serial numbers. Now, the reason that people use serial numbers, why would you use a serial number? Because it's easier. When I'm talking with another person, I say, yeah, it's order number 51. That is infinitely easier than using whatever a 16-digit UUID is. This is where we get into a situation where when you are developing, you're developing a solution in one way, but you are presenting it in a completely different way. So there is nothing wrong with you actually using a dual system. You as a developer, you are going to know that your ID is not going to use serial numbers. It is going to use the UUIDs. And because of that, you are going to create a parallel system where it's going to make it easier for the user. So what does that look like? That comes in the form of you are going to have whatever it is. If it's an invoice, you're going to have an invoice and call it invoice ID. Or if it's, even if it is a serial number, call it a serial number. Now, my conventions say that in every single table, I will have a primary key, and that primary key will always be called ID. This serial number can be my user number, which let's go ahead and create that. We'll go into the options for that particular field. And this is where I can put a serial number. And the great thing about FileMaker is FileMaker in this particular dialog doesn't really care whether you actually have a prefix. Even though the field is specified as a number, you can still include text information. So if I want to type in INV and put in underscore is 1, I can certainly do that. You can even prefix with some zeros. And FileMaker will still see this as an incrementing number. It's one of the flexibilities that FileMaker has. But there's nothing wrong with me doing this in a parallel system. So that under the hood, I'm going to wire everything using that UUID. For the user, for them to be able to do a search or, hey, Mary, yeah, can you bring up invoice number 69? No problem. She goes into Find, she finds 69, and it brings it up. But underneath the hood, UUID. All right, enough of that rant right there. We're on naming conventions and what I wish people would have shown me in terms of my options. You will find FileMaker developers out there that they like to do this. In FileMaker, we have all these field types. So I'll select on email and I'll use this one. Text, number, these are our primary types. Text, number, date, time, timestamp, container, calculation, and summary. Now, container, calculation and summary, these have a line underneath them because these are this is derived data. It's not your raw data. These are all of your raw data types. So you're going to have something that's either a text or a number, date, time, timestamp, container. We won't go through the types because they're pretty obvious. But calculation, there's pretty much two. If you're new to FileMaker, there's going to be unstored versus stored. And just think of this: unstored, bad; stored, good. If you ever, down the road, find up wanting to have a really performant database, something that performs well, the more unstored calculations you have, and this is just a general rule, but the more unstored calculations you have, and the more that you have them on the layout, the slower and slower your database will become. An unstored calculation is saying to FileMaker, I put it onto you to calculate this, as opposed to I put it onto me as the developer to make sure that the value is accurate. And in that case, what you can do is there's a lot of times you can switch off of using a calculation, in particular an unstored calculation, and FileMaker becomes unstored based on a few different pieces of criteria. It's unstored if it can't reference, or what it does reference only occurs once. Here's a great example. If I create a calculation and that calculation references what's known as a global field, it becomes unstored by its very nature. Or if it references another calculated field that references a global, what have you. What happens is FileMaker instantly, it will show you that it becomes unstored, and it lists it right here in the actual description. So you can see right here, we've got all these different options and comments. When you click to toggle here, what it does is it's flipping between what FileMaker says is the metadata about the field and your comment that's actually stored right here. So good thing to know, you just click and toggle, which is, you can see right here, one of the things I try to do is take advantage of the comments. Put the comments on there. That's part of your conventions, is when you create a field, take the time and put, if the field isn't super obvious, take the time and put just in a little bit of identification. You can see right here that by duplicating that field, I actually duplicated this right here. I would need to take the time to fix this. Go in, change this to human readable serial number for easier communication, even if it's that long. Take the time and do it while you're sitting here. But that unstored will show up. I don't have any calculations right here. It will show up and it'll be listed right here in the very beginning of this field. It'll say unstored, and I'll save that for another video at another time when we get into creating those unstored, because I'm trying to stay on track and talk about naming conventions. So my naming conventions, coming back around, I like to have things be plainly named unless identification is needed in terms of FileMaker, which it's a good lead up to this. What I've been talking about is because some developers, what they will do is on this email field, or in particular, let's take a calculated field in a particular case, because this is when it really boils down for the most part. So we have a calculation. Let's see, calculation. I got that right. Calculation. And we'll go over and we'll switch it to a calculation type. We'll create that, and we'll just put in a calculation right now that will be a completely storable calculation, 2 plus 2. FileMaker completely can store that. You'll notice that it does not say unstored yet. But what they do is the name of the field becomes the place where you get to apply whatever organization you're applying to the whole of your FileMaker system. So this is where Many developers will say, this is a text, unstored, calculated global result. What they do is they use prefixes. And these prefixes have to be understood by the developer who's developing them. Now, the downside is anybody who comes in after the fact has to decipher that. Now, I'm not against these prefixes, but I choose to go for a method that is more easily understood or obvious. And I try to put that into the name of what I'm actually naming, hence the wonderful ability to rename things in FileMaker. So if you're going to use these conventions, let me give you a really good tip. If you're going to use conventions, here's what I suggest. In your FileMaker solution, you have a lot of organizational tools. Use those organizational tools to document for yourself. Make sure that you are going to say, for example, in your layouts, create a dedicated layout and put it up at the top. It can be non-accessible to user and call it conventions. That's the first one. So let's use this layout number 2 that was created, and we'll just move it up to the top. We will create a new separator, and we will turn off this layout so it is not part of the visible layouts that a user can choose through either the menu system or when in browse mode. Rename this layout. I'll double click to conventions and use this, or I don't care, call it documentation. You need to have a place where you as the developer keep track of things as you develop, because what you're doing is you're ultimately creating something that will grow and grow and grow and grow. And if you don't do this from the outset, you will create a ball of spaghetti mess that is just horrendous to get through. So create one called conventions. Create another one called documentation. How many you have and how many you want to manage is up to you. Remember, this list of things grows. It will get longer and longer and longer and longer. And if you don't have good conventions, it will become a nightmare. Read up on conventions, compare others, and then pick one that is comfortable to you. Another way, or the place that I tend to like to put this stuff, is in the scripting workspace. So when you get to it, scripts is where you're basically putting in all of your automation in FileMaker. So I will opt to, up at the very top, I will tend to have the very first script will be my version of my solution of FileMaker. Then my very next script ends up being, you can call it documentation or whatever you want to call it. Let's scroll off here. Documentation. If I misspelled that, then you can get me on that. But that's where I'm going to have this. Now, documentation, this can be standards. If you're working with a team and you want to convey those standards, I also will tend to have a script. Now, there's multiple ways. I could create click the plus and add a new script. I already have a script. It maybe has some of what I need. So let's say in this script, I already have one comment in here. So I already have a comment in this script, and I'm using it up at the top here. I'm just going to duplicate this. Right click, duplicate. It's already got the comment in there. Save them all. There's that. I'm going to hit my return and call it change log. This is super important. I wish somebody would have told me, within your first 5 scripts up at the top, put a change log and then just use that as a notepad. Seriously, this is the best thing you can do in your solution is come in and for each comment that you have here, it's just you use it as a notepad. Don't treat it like a script. Don't treat it like anything other than your personal notepad for things that you do to the database as you do them, because I guarantee you'll forget what you did. And you can come in here and you can just create a new comment. I'm just putting in the hash mark, by the way. In this scripting workspace, when you start to type any type of character, FileMaker wants to jump to that particular step. Well, just putting in that Shift 3 will put that comment right there. And I will timestamp things. I'll say I have a shortcut, a key expansion tool that I use that will put in the date right there and say I changed the whole way that customers are tracked. And then you can put whatever you want. And one tip in the scripting workspace, things are different, obviously, on Macintosh versus on Windows, and that is how things are displayed. Unfortunately, FileMaker's IDE does not provide us with any flexibility. I mean, zero, none. IDE being the integrated development environment. What I have here, I can't change the font, although I should say this plugin right here that I have that's loaded in my FileMaker solution does allow you to change the font, but only on Macintosh. It doesn't work on Windows, and it's all not native. It's a hack. He's modifying the window directly and how it displays. It's not something that's coming from FileMaker in terms of this dialog. So I don't do that, but within this window, if you are developing primarily only on Macintosh, something in particular that I like with comments is that in this comment, I'll hit the space bar and I'll go to the end of the line here. You can use what's called a hard return or a soft return. If I hit a hard return here on this, it actually accepts the comment, but you can put soft returns into a comment. They don't work well on, because on Windows, they won't render as well at all, but an option return on a Macintosh will allow me to put returns. These are soft returns within the script workspace. And for those of you that are really old, this will forever be called ScriptMaker. So we are working within ScriptMaker. If you're old school FileMaker, then you know this as ScriptMaker. Everything was FileMaker, ScriptMaker. It wasn't Layout Maker, but this is eternally in my heart. The script workspace is ScriptMaker to me, although I am getting used to calling it. But those soft returns are pretty nice for putting in longer comments. But again, this doesn't work on, it won't look as well on Windows in terms of how things go. But you basically just come in here. It's so easy. You've got this change log. If you're creating a reverse order change log, or if you're using a change log that's in ascending order because you want people to read them from, it doesn't matter which direction you go, just duplicate and then just put in your new timestamp. You know, whatever your timestamp is, and then whatever you've done. Blah, 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 blah. So definitely keep that changelog as number 2 script. That's what I like to do. Keep dedicated layouts that help you as the developer in order to keep track of things, and you'll be much better off. I wish somebody would have told me that you can use that. In fact, in let's go back into the relationships here. I showed you this, and I believe that was in the previous video, using notes here as well. So this note tool in the relationship graph will allow you to create these notes and create them to use them to your best advantage. Recognize what you can do with them. Note about the relationship. So you've got that now. I will use, different developers use colors in different ways on the relationship graph, but these notes, what you can do is the notes will always and perpetually be behind table occurrences. Notice that when I drag that there, even though it's above, FileMaker does have an ordering. You can use that note in order to drag it, and it will surround that or however many table occurrences you want to use. So if I want this note to be about these, then that is an organizational tip that you can use. Note that it actually, when you have multiple notes, one note does cover another note. Let's see if we can get that one behind there or on top, which it's going to be a hassle though if you're going to do this. Even if this note does float on top now, as soon as I click this, there's no layering for notes, unfortunately, but there is the ability to put those notes. Now, what I do with notes is I will use them as headers for sections, and you can take advantage and remember, use all your styling in all of your notes. If you want a transparent note and you just want some text on screen and you want that text to be large, go ahead and take advantage of the fact that you can do that. Although down the future, if FileMaker ever does modify this relationship graph, and you've taken the time to do all this organization, it might be a nightmare in terms of what it does. But I will take from Claris any additional organization in this graph, because solutions that grow out of control without any organization, it just becomes a nightmare. I mean, if you're newer, since I'm shooting this for newer intermediates, there have, over the course of FileMaker's time, there have been people that have come out with full white papers and documentation about this, about how you organize these, whether you have them on the left, on the right, what's the organization, is it a star, a spider web? No offense to, I think it was Ray Colligan, he came out with a paper and had something like 12 to 15 different relationship graph types that you could choose from, which fundamentally, if you give people anything more than 3 choices, you've now reduced the amount of time, or you've increased the amount of time that it takes them to actually parse and process and get through something. So I keep my relationship graphs pretty simple. One of the most popular is called Anchor Buoy. And Anchor Buoy, I'll be honest with you, it is nothing more than an organizational tactic. It is most everything that you see in FileMaker is a way that you can organize the growing mountain of information that you are trying to harness. And that's all that it is. Anchor Buoy is an attempt to, when you get into the graph, well, it's not an attempt, it's a very successful attempt at keeping this organized so that when you get in here, it actually makes sense. But otherwise, if you truly wanted to take the graph at its face value, in terms of when you get into your relationships and structuring your data, FileMaker doesn't care how you wire things up. Your users will eventually, because how you wire them up will dictate how well that solution will perform. And these are the things that you pick up as you develop. That's the 3 years that you need to give yourself to become really proficient and absorb enough information. There is so much information about there to learn that you cannot expect yourself to get a FileMaker solution right if you're just picking FileMaker up and you want to get it right within the first year. Absolutely not possible. Every single person that watches this video that is a FileMaker developer and has been developing a FileMaker will tell you, as they learned, they made changes. Nobody got it right from the first time. So don't think that you will. Just be willing to pick up and then adjust and adapt your solution as you go along. I'm going into talking head now, talking head mode when I just want to show things. But that is my advice if you're getting started with FileMaker. All right, so we've got organizational tools that we've gone through. What are some other things that I wish I would know as a newer FileMaker developer? I talked about the multiple windows and using those. I'm already 25 minutes on this video, but I'm sure you're probably happy to just take more and more information if this is information that you haven't gotten before. Talked about these, using things like layouts and scripts for the purpose of documentation. I wish somebody would have shown me that. Let's get into this one. Learning. Since you're learning FileMaker, oh my gosh, how do you learn? Oh gosh, I have to show you this just because from a comparison standpoint, and I need to move this off here so I can see over here what we've got going on. From a comparison standpoint, learning FileMaker versus learning Java. Let's compare. Over here in FileMaker, we have, we're in the steps. Yeah, I'm in scripting workspace. So I have all these things to learn. So if I was to expand all of these, and these are plugins, these don't count. This one, and this one, they don't count. Everything up from here is FileMaker. But if I was to say, oh my gosh, I'm going to expand all of these, and then we're going to take a look. Here's the frustrating part of learning any new technology. You look at this and you say, if set field, set variable, allow user abort, configure NFC reading, else if. I have to learn all of this. I mean, I don't know what any one of these do. How do I learn all of these? And right now we're just looking at the script steps. If we go over into the defined database and go look at fields, which I could have just accessed a calculation in the scripting workspace too. If I go over here and I scroll through all of my functions and I just say, I have to learn all. Now again, these are plugins. You'll have to ignore these bbox plugins. I have 4 plugins installed. I should have turned them off before I installed this. But nevertheless, my point is we're going through all of these and you're asking yourself, I have to learn all of these functions. And here's what I'll give you as a, sort of a sidebar in terms of becoming a proficient and really good FileMaker developer. Honestly, you won't feel like a super good developer until you feel like you know at least half or more of all functions and all script steps. I remember when I first got started with FileMaker, they came out with a thick manual, and I had little yellow sticky notes, and I put sticky notes on all of them. And the best way to learn all of these functions, I'll show you the best way to learn them and become familiar. The best way, honestly, is to just use them. You have to come up with a reason to use the functions and the script steps, because if you don't even know that they're there and you don't use them, then what you don't know can hurt you. What you do know about all of the tools that are available, that's what allows you to expand your creativity and come up with all kinds of stuff in FileMaker. So I completely sidebarred on the whole standards thing. I think I covered most of everything I wanted to. But the best way to learn them is to go through the documentation, in all honesty. FileMaker does not, unfortunately, here at the steps, when I select this, I get a little bit of a description down here at the bottom in the UI. FileMaker tries to help me out, but it's very, very tiny, and it doesn't have any examples. It would be really nice if FileMaker integrated their documentation into the UI, but they don't. So even when we're looking at, I'll add a quick little if condition right here that'll get me into a calculation dialog box. So even here, if I see that I've got, I didn't do my trigonometry, and I don't remember the atan function. Let's go to the one that's common that we're going to be using all the time, if. So right here we get this very tiny returns result 1 if test is true, returns result 2 if test is false. Great. Can you tell me more? The more is in the documentation. So I think this isn't a beginner thing. I don't even know why I need to show you this, but go to the help and open up the FileMaker Pro help. And is that not gonna, there, finally open. All right, so the help is going to be super helpful, but the help is not immediately helpful if you're new and you've got all this stuff. Okay, where do I go? Well, you want the references. The references are the functions themselves and the script steps. So let's go in and type in if, come up with the results that FileMaker is going to throw back at me, and go to the if function itself. So here is where you get all of the value, and keep this open to the side. I still do this myself. In fact, I use a program called Dash. I'll open it up right now. Dash is I've talked about this on videos before. Dash allows you to have multiple sets of documentation open. It's on Macintosh. They have one that's available on Windows. If you know what it is, put a comment on this video, or I'll put a comment. But it's somewhat a direct clone of this, but it allows me to have multiple sets of documentation. So I can have JavaScript documentation, HTML5, CSS. When you're working in multiple languages, it's really nice. If you're only developing in FileMaker, you don't have to get Dash. But the person who maintains these, I'm in FileMaker 19 now, but the person that maintains these has not updated to FileMaker 18. If you do choose to go download Dash and you're on a Macintosh, the way that you access the FileMaker documentation is in the preferences area under the doc sets. Is it there? Downloads. No, it's in the downloads, and you have to go to this section right here, user contributed. So when you go to the user contributed, it will load up, and then you can type in FileMaker up here, and it will come up with it. So Jason started this, and he's got different documentation sets, but you'll notice that FileMaker 19 isn't there. He had done 11 through 17, I think, and then he didn't do 18. I wanted 18, so I went and did 18 for him, but I haven't taken the time to do 19 for it either. But whether you're using Dash or you're using the native documentation, the whole point is this is where you get to figure out where it originated. If is way old. I mean, you can't have logic without if. But you get your description, and then scroll down. This is where you get your examples. These examples in the help are so useful. Back in the 90s, we made a big chart that we took to developer conferences, all of the FileMaker developer conferences, and that chart was an absolute hit. We gave it away for free because it promoted the business, ISO Productions, and it just had all of the examples, and that's somebody would be able to reference the chart and just look on their wall. People have made apps, people have made all kinds of things. You really don't need anything. You don't need a chart, you don't need a book, you don't need anything other than the documentation that you have right here in the help. And it's just, it allows you, these are the things that even on some systems, I come into the documentation just because I remember that's the place where I learned something, and I just come in and I'll just reference what's here and just duplicate it. One in particular, let's talk about if you're creating a script and you're doing a script, they came out with something new here recently. Let's see, write data file. So when FileMaker got its own ability to write data in and out, and don't worry if you're newer or intermediate, you don't have to learn what I'm showing you right now. My point is, this is where documentation, even as an advanced developer, helps me. So if I'll go search for write in here, and it is write to data file. There's a script step right there, and I'll scroll down to the examples. Here's where I get my examples, right here. I just basically emulate all of these steps, take it straight from the examples, and there you go. And then you can get something working within this. Now, of course, as you get more and more advanced, the whole point is be as familiar as you can with as many different script steps. Watch videos, they can watch Udemy videos. I don't even have anything on Udemy. Anybody that will help you learn FileMaker is useful in order to learn as many of these as possible and be able to go through them and know what you're going to use, and eventually you'll even know what percentage of the time. I know that this is a high percentage use. Set field within scripting, super, super high. Set variable, super, super high. Always, anytime you have any conditions, always commenting. Else if, exit loop if. How many times do I use that? That's going to be a lower frequency use because it really depends on the type of loop that you're using. But if you're using a loop, you need to know that you're going to use it. And that's where you need to become familiar with these things. You need to learn when you're going to use each one. I guess I could take the time at some point in time and, do a video just on each one. In fact, I know that there are places where people have written blog posts and done stuff like that. But yeah, it'd be a good thing to do. If there are things that you would like to know about, ask below. Use this video to leave a comment and basically say, hey, I'd like to learn about this, and I'll do my best to cover it here. All right, so I think this is a good stopping point for today, just for messing around for a Friday. I don't know how many people actually watch these, but there's some FileMaker information. That's a good list of things that I wish people would have told me. Just to wrap up on the whole thing, that I sort of, I tend to have these tangents. Some people like it, some people hate it, because they end up picking up new little tips. The conventions that you use, again, I've already referenced FileMaker standards that you can go to if you want to know what my conventions are, or just watch the videos that I have over at the magazine website. Whether you use prefixes or extensions or not, the whole point of the standardization and the organization is easier organization. And what I was going to say back at that point in time was, and I've done videos about this on YouTube here for free, which you can go look at. They're still valid. In fact, a lot of FileMaker information. This is a good thing to say for newer and intermediate users. FileMaker is a very, I'm going to call it a very trustworthy, reliable, and backwards compatible system. Unlike open source, where open source is constantly changing, and the pace at which they change things is so fast that what you create in 1 year, in the next year, you will typically need to refactor and make something new. In terms of trustworthy and reliability, FileMaker has maintained its file format, and its backwards compatibility is so high that things that were recorded and things that I created on the magazine website, videos that I recorded back in 2010, are absolutely just as viable today as they were back then. And I can actually honestly say that probably 80% of all of the content that I've ever created is still reliable and trustworthy, and still works in FileMaker, and it's still advisable. It's that good. It's sort of like, how much have cars changed? The steering wheel is still in the same place. You don't need to relearn how to drive because that's still there. All they do is they add on new technology. So it's the same within FileMaker. It's not a combustion engine now, it's an electric engine. They added it on, but how and what you do within the car and how you drive it is the same, and the same thing applies. So a lot of your FileMaker learning is fundamental. So when it comes to standards and naming things, this has been the same. The order in which fields are presented: creation order, field name, field type, custom order. What's the most common one? Field name. It's the easiest one. You click here, you sort by field name. What's the easiest convention to do in terms of keeping everything together? It is to use a prefix that groups everything together. That is why people will use either some type of prefix like this, or they will do this. If I'm creating a people database, I'm going to name these things so that they all group together. Maybe I'll put the prefix of the table itself if I'm going to use a prefix. People. And then if I put in people, what's it going to do? It's going to group those together. So now everything is grouped together within this area. And you can do the same thing with scripts, although with scripts you have folders. With scripts and layouts, you have the advantage of folders and separators. Here in the field area, you do not have any folders in order to organize your fields. You only have just a list view, and it is alphabetical or is by some other order, creation order, what have you. But choose a convention that you like, and then stick with it and modify it if you need to. If your database gets really big, and then you decide to change your conventions, well, then you've got a lot more work ahead of you. All right, so I think I'm going to wrap up the videos. I'm getting hungry. I'm going to go eat some food. This one's 40 minutes again. I really got to focus on making these shorter unless you like these videos. Again, take this opportunity to use this video if you've watched even up to this point, through all my rambling about FileMaker, to leave a comment below, say what you'd like to learn. I am even considering, just because I want to get on YouTube a little bit more on Fridays, if you want to go one-on-one, and you're okay with it streaming out to YouTube, I will do Zoom calls with other developers. Doesn't matter what your level is, beginner, intermediate, or advanced, and we can just solve a problem on YouTube. If that's something that you're interested in, you can contact me at editor@filemakermagazine.com. You can always go over to my website and go check that out. Of course, the stuff I'm putting out on YouTube, I do refer to the magazine site, but I'm just out here to give the stuff on YouTube. It is my avenue for giving out the free content that I give out. So that's going to be a wrap for today, and you need more FileMaker content, go check out the magazine, go search the web, go to the community out on Claris, and get involved. All right, so much luck to you, and as I always say on my other videos, happy FileMaking, and have a good Friday if it's Friday for you, or some other day. Whatever day it is, have a good day. All right, see you later.